The termination letter was sitting between us. I stared at it for almost a full minute before I finally looked up at my boss. David Mercer wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the moment I knew something was terribly wrong. For 8 years, I'd worked for Mercer Cole Logistics. 8 years of early mornings, late nights, weekend phone calls, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, emergency trips to warehouses in the middle of winter. I'd built my entire adult career inside that company, and now my boss was sliding a single sheet of paper across his desk as if he were handing me a restaurant bill. "I'm sorry, Emily." His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at the letter again. Employment termination. My name was printed underneath. "You're firing me?" David sighed. "It's a difficult decision." "No." I shook my head. "That's not what I asked." He finally looked at me. "Yes, you're firing me." "Effective immediately." I laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes your brain doesn't know what else to do when your entire life suddenly stops making sense. "Why?" David leaned back. "We're restructuring." I stared at him. "Restructuring?" "Yes." "Then why did you promote Jessica Reynolds 3 weeks ago?" His expression changed. Only slightly. But I noticed. I always noticed details. That was part of what made me good at my job. Jessica Reynolds, the woman who had somehow become David's favorite employee within 18 months of joining the company. She was smart, charming, beautiful, confident, and absolutely terrible at taking responsibility. But David adored her. If Jessica missed a deadline, she was overwhelmed. If she made a mistake, someone had given her bad information. If she lost a client, the client was unreasonable. And if she succeeded at something, David made sure everyone knew about it. I'd never complained. At least not formally. I believed good work eventually spoke for itself. That morning I discovered how naive I had been. I pointed at the termination letter. "This says I failed to properly supervise the Harrison medical account." That's what the investigation concluded. "What investigation?" David said nothing. I leaned forward. "When did the company investigate me?" "We've been reviewing the account for several weeks." "Without telling me?" "It was confidential." I stared at him. "David, I found the billing discrepancies." He looked away. "I know. I reported them." "I know. I told you exactly which transactions were suspicious." "I know." "Then how am I suddenly responsible for them?" He rubbed his forehead. "Emily?" "No." My voice became firmer. "Don't give me that." I picked up the folder I'd brought with me. I brought copies of everything. I opened it. Here are the original invoices. Then another document. Here are the approval logs. Another. And here are the emails showing Jessica requested access to Harrison's billing account. David's face went pale. I noticed. "You know," he didn't answer. "You know she did it." Still nothing. "You know Jessica altered those invoices." He finally whispered. "We don't have proof." I laughed bitterly. "You have proof." I pushed the documents toward him. "You just don't want to use it." David looked at me. And then he said the sentence that changed my life. "Sometimes protecting the company means making difficult choices." I stared at him. "Is that what you're calling this?" He didn't respond. I stood. "No." I picked up my purse. "This isn't about protecting the company." I looked him directly in the eyes. "You're protecting Jessica." His face hardened. "Be careful, Emily." "Why?" "Because you're angry." "I'm not angry." I paused at the door. "I'm disappointed." Then I walked out. The hallway seemed longer than usual. People looked up as I passed. Some immediately looked away. Others whispered. My friend Sarah from accounting stood near the printer. She saw the folder in my hand. Her eyes filled with tears. "Emily?" I shook my head. "Not here." She nodded. I kept walking. When I reached my office, I stared at the nameplate on my desk. Emily Carter, operations manager, 8 years. Everything I had built, gone. I opened my desk drawer. Inside were photographs, my first company ID, a thank you card from a client, a coffee mug someone had given me after I successfully rescued a major shipment during a hurricane. I put everything into a cardboard box. One box. That was all 8 years had become. As I walked through the office, nobody said goodbye. Not because they didn't care, because everyone was afraid. They knew what had happened. They just didn't know whether speaking up would make them the next person. Carrying a box. Outside, the afternoon sun was painfully bright. I put the box in my car, then sat behind the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine. For 10 minutes, I just stared through the windshield. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetheart." I tried to sound normal. "Hi, Mom. How was work?" I looked at the cardboard box beside me. "I got fired." Silence. "What?" "I got fired." "Why?" I swallowed. "They said I mishandled a major account." My mother knew me. She knew how seriously I took my work. "Did you?" "No." "Then don't you dare believe them." That was my mother. Always certain of me when I couldn't be certain of myself. I drove home. That evening, I placed the cardboard box on my kitchen table. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet. I opened a bottle of wine. Then another. By midnight, I was sitting on the floor surrounded by pieces of my old life. My 8-year anniversary certificate. Performance reviews. Awards. Letters from clients. One review from David himself. "Emily is one of the most reliable leaders in our organization. If she says something will get done, it gets done." I stared at those words. Then I looked at my termination letter. How could someone write that about me? And then destroy my career? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I started applying for jobs. I told myself I wouldn't let David win. Within 3 hours, I'd submitted 14 applications. Operations manager, logistics director, supply chain consultant, regional operations supervisor. By the end of the week, I'd applied to 52 positions. Then the rejection emails started. Some were polite. Some were automated. Some never responded. The worst were the interviews. One hiring manager looked at my resume. "You were terminated from Mercer Cole?" "Yes." "Why?" I explained the situation. He nodded. "I see." Then he smiled professionally. "We'll be in touch." They never were. 2 weeks later, I finally received an offer. The salary was almost 30% lower than my previous position. The company wanted me to relocate to another state. I was ready to accept. Then they called. "We've completed your employment verification." My stomach dropped. "And? There are concerns regarding the circumstances of your departure." I closed my eyes. "I understand. I'm sorry." The offer disappeared. So did another. And another. Someone had put a mark next to my name. I couldn't prove it. But I knew who had done it. 3 months after my termination, my savings were almost gone. I stopped going to restaurants. Stopped buying anything unnecessary. I canceled my gym membership. Sold furniture. I even sold my car and bought an old used sedan. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. Insurance. I stared at the numbers. Then I whispered, "How did I get here?" There was no answer. The phone rang. It was Sarah. I almost didn't answer. "Hello?" "Emily." Her voice was shaky. "Are you okay?" "I'm managing." She was silent. Then she said, "Jessica is still there." I closed my eyes. "Of course she is. She got another promotion." I laughed. "Of course she did." Sarah lowered her voice. "But that's not why I called." "What happened?" "I found something." My heart started beating faster. "What?" "I can't talk about it over the phone." "Sarah, meet me tomorrow." We met at a coffee shop across town. Sarah arrived wearing sunglasses even though we were indoors. She sat across from me and placed a flash drive on the table. "What is that?" "Everything." I stared at it. "Everything what?" "The Harrison account." My hands went cold. Sarah leaned closer. "Jessica did it." I said nothing. I knew it. "No." Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand." She looked terrified. She didn't just alter invoices. She moved money. My heart stopped. "How much?" "Almost $500,000. I stared at the flash drive. "Where?" "Several accounts." "Whose?" Sarah swallowed. One belongs to a company called Reynolds Consulting. My stomach dropped. Reynolds? Yes. Jessica's last name? Sarah nodded. And there's more. She pulled out several printed pages. Reynolds Consulting is registered to Jessica's cousin. I stared at the documents. Everything suddenly made sense. The strange invoices, the fake delivery charges, the altered payment records, the missing money. Jessica had been stealing from the company, and David had fired me to protect her. Does David know? Sarah looked away. He knows. How do you know? Because I saw them arguing. When? The day after you were fired. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. Anger because he'd known. Relief because I wasn't crazy. I hadn't failed. I'd been sacrificed. I took the flash drive home. For the first time in months, I felt something other than hopelessness. I felt purpose. I spent the next 3 nights reviewing every document. There were hundreds of transactions. I built spreadsheets, cross-referenced invoices, matched delivery records, tracked payment transfers. The more I found, the worse it became. Jessica had been manipulating accounts for nearly a year, but she hadn't acted alone. Someone inside accounting had helped her. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. One of the approvals carried David Mercer's digital signature. Not forged, authenticated. David had personally approved a payment to Reynolds Consulting. The payment was for $185,000. The description said, Emergency Operational Consulting. There had never been any consulting. I stared at the screen. David wasn't just protecting Jessica. He might have been involved. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Karen Mitchell. She specialized in employment and corporate fraud cases. I placed the documents in front of her. She spent nearly an hour reviewing them. Finally, she looked up. Emily, yes? You may have a very serious case. My heart raced. What should I do? Nothing publicly. Don't contact David. Don't contact Jessica. Don't threaten anyone. Preserve everything. She pointed at the flash drive. Make 3 copies. Store them separately. And let me handle the legal side. For the first time since I had been fired, I felt like I had a weapon. Not revenge. Evidence. But Karen warned me about something. Emily, winning a legal case won't automatically rebuild your career. I know. You may never get your old job back. I smiled. I don't want it back. She looked surprised. What do you want? I thought about it. Then I remembered something David had said during my final meeting. Sometimes protecting the company means making difficult choices. I smiled. I want to build something of my own. Karen raised an eyebrow. Do you have a business plan? No. Capital? Not much. Clients? None. She smiled. But? I looked at the spreadsheets I'd created. But I know logistics. And for the first time, I started thinking about what might happen if I stopped trying to get my old life back. What if I built a new one? What if getting fired wasn't the end? What if it was the beginning? I didn't know it yet, but within 12 months, I'd build a company. I'd employ dozens of people. I'd expose the truth about Mercer and Cole. And the man who had once fired me to protect his favorite employee would eventually walk into my office, sit across from me, and ask the question I never thought I'd hear. Emily, will you give me a job? But before that could happen, I had to survive the hardest year of my life. For the first time in 8 years, I woke up without an alarm. There was no office to rush to. No 7:30 meeting. No stack of emails waiting for me. No David Mercer calling to ask whether the Harrison shipment had arrived. The silence should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like failure. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Then my phone buzzed. A rejection email? I deleted it. Another one arrived. Deleted. Another. Deleted. By 9 in the morning, I stopped checking. I got out of bed, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, Carter Logistics Consulting. I stared at the words. They looked ridiculous. I had no office, no employees, no clients, no investors, barely enough savings to cover 2 months of expenses. But I had something else. 8 years of experience. I knew exactly where logistics companies wasted money. I knew how warehouses operated. I understood shipping contracts, carrier negotiations, inventory systems, route planning, billing audits, and supply chain management. And most importantly, I knew where companies were vulnerable. I'd learned that lesson the hardest possible way. My first potential client came through an old contact. His name was Mark Dalton, owner of a regional furniture manufacturer. I'd worked with him several times at Mercer Cole. I called him, "Mark, it's Emily Carter." There was a pause. "Emily?" "Yes." I heard what happened. I took a breath. "I'm starting my own consulting company." Another pause. "Congratulations. I'm helping small businesses reduce shipping costs and identify billing errors." He chuckled softly. "You're telling me you're doing this alone?" "Right now." "What do you need?" A chance. Silence. Then he said, "Come by tomorrow." The next morning, I wore my best suit. It was the same suit I'd worn during my final promotion at Mercer Cole. I couldn't afford a new one. Mark welcomed me into his office. He looked at my business plan, then at me. "You really think you can save us money?" "I know I can." "How much?" 10 to 15%. He laughed. "That's ambitious." "Give me 2 weeks. If I can't find savings, you don't pay me." He studied me. Deal. For 14 days, I worked like my life depended on it. Because it did. I reviewed every carrier agreement, every fuel surcharge, every warehouse invoice, every damaged shipment, every late delivery penalty. I found mistakes everywhere. Some were small. Others were enormous. One carrier had been charging Mark's company for unused warehouse space for 11 months. Another was billing duplicate fuel surcharges. Together, the errors totaled nearly $94,000 a year. I presented my findings. Mark stared at the spreadsheet, then looked at me. "How much do I owe you?" $5,000. He laughed. "You're joking." "No." He wrote the check, then added another $5,000. I looked at him. "What's this?" "Your bonus." "I can't accept that." "You can." He smiled. "Because you're good." I took the check. It was the first money my company ever earned. That night I cried. Not because of the money, because someone had finally trusted my work again. One client became 5. Mark referred me to another business owner. That owner referred me to someone else. Within 3 months, I had 5 clients. I was working from my apartment. My dining table became my desk. My bedroom became a storage room for files. My living room became a conference room. I ate sandwiches while reviewing contracts. I worked until midnight, sometimes later. But every hour belonged to me. Nobody could fire me. Nobody could take credit for my work. Nobody could tell me to stay quiet when I found something wrong. One afternoon, I received an email from a company I'd never heard of. The subject line read, "Interested in your services." I opened it. They were a regional medical distributor. They wanted me to review their entire logistics operation. The contract was worth $28,000. I stared at the number. $28,000. That was more than I'd earned in several months. I accepted immediately. Then I realized I had a problem. The project was too large for one person. I needed help. I called Sarah. "Do you remember when you told me you were thinking about leaving Mercer Cole?" "Yes." "Do you still want to?" There was silence. "Are you offering me a job?" I smiled. "Yes." She laughed. "Emily, you don't even have an office." "I know." "How much can you pay me?" "Not much." "How much?" "Enough to survive." Sarah laughed again. "When do I start?" "Monday." Sarah became my first employee. We worked from my apartment for 2 months. Then we hired Tom, then another analyst. Soon there were 6 of us. I rented a small office above a dentist's practice. The carpet was old. The paint was peeling. The elevator made a terrifying noise. But when I opened the door on our first morning, I felt like I had finally arrived. I put a small sign on the wall. Carter Logistics. No CO. No fancy title. Just the company name. Meanwhile, Mercer Cole was falling apart. I didn't have to look for news about my former employer. The news found me. One morning, Sarah forwarded me an article. Mercer Cole loses major medical account. Another article appeared the next week. logistics firm under internal review. Then, board questions, leadership at Mercer Cole. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I simply read. The company I'd spent 8 years building was collapsing, and the reason was finally becoming clear. Jessica had been exposed. Not by me, by an internal audit. The audit found irregular payments, false invoices, unauthorized transfers, shell companies. The evidence was overwhelming. Jessica was suspended, then fired, then arrested. But the story didn't end there. Investigators discovered that some payments had been approved by senior management, including David. I received a call from Karen. "Emily, we need to talk." "What happened?" "Federal investigators contacted me." My heart started beating faster. "About Mercer Cole?" "Yes. They're reviewing the documents you provided." I sat down, and? "They believe you were wrongfully terminated." I closed my eyes. After a year of wondering whether anyone would ever believe me, someone finally did. "Do I need to testify?" "Possibly." "Will David be there?" "Probably." I didn't know how I felt about that. I imagined sitting across from him, the man who had once been my mentor, the man who had written glowing reviews about me, the man who had fired me. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted him to understand what he'd done. The investigation. 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room with federal investigators. They asked questions for nearly 6 hours. I answered everyone. Who had access? Who approved transactions? When did I report irregularities? What did David say? What did Jessica say? I provided emails, documents, reports, copies of everything. At one point, one investigator looked at me. "Ms. Carter?" "Yes?" "You discovered this fraud before anyone else?" "I discovered the discrepancies. Why didn't management follow up?" I looked down. "Because they didn't want to." He paused. "Why?" I thought about David, then answered honestly. "Because someone wanted to protect Jessica." When I left the building, Karen was waiting outside. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted." She smiled. "You did well?" I nodded. Then I looked up at the sky. For the first time, I felt free. The offer. 6 months after starting Carter Logistics, I received an unexpected call. A venture investor wanted to meet. His name was Richard Lawson. He had heard about my consulting work. He invited me to lunch. I almost declined. Then I remembered something my mother always said. You can't complain about opportunities you refuse to explore. So I went. Richard listened to my story. He studied my business model, then asked, "How big do you want this to become?" I laughed. "I don't know. That's not an answer." I looked at him. "Big enough that no small business owner has to lose money because they don't understand their supply chain." Richard smiled. "Now that's an answer." He offered to invest $2 million. I nearly choked on my water. $2 million? For 20%. I shook my head. "No." He looked surprised. "Why?" "Because 20% is too much." He smiled. "Most people would accept immediately. I'm not most people. I had spent too many years building someone else's company. I wasn't going to give away a huge piece of mine without thinking. We negotiated. For 3 weeks. Eventually, we agreed on a smaller equity stake. The money changed everything. We hired developers, built software, opened 2 new offices, expanded into automated logistics auditing. Our software could identify billing anomalies in minutes, the same kind of anomalies I'd once spent weeks investigating at Mercer Cole. Except now, I could detect them automatically. We called the platform Carter Track. Within 4 months, companies across the country were using it. One evening, I walked through our new headquarters. There were 37 employees, people laughing, developers writing code, analysts studying shipping data, customer service representatives answering calls. I stopped near the reception desk. Sarah walked over. "You okay?" I smiled. "Yeah. You look emotional." "I am." She laughed. "Why?" I looked around. Because 1 year ago, I was sitting on my kitchen floor wondering how I'd pay rent. And now? I smiled. "Now I'm worried about whether we have enough conference rooms." Sarah laughed. Then David called. It happened on a Tuesday. My assistant knocked on my office door. Emily. Yes? There is someone online too. Who? She hesitated. David Mercer. My heart stopped. I stared at the phone. For several seconds, I didn't move. Then I picked it up. Hello? Emily. His voice sounded different. Older. Tired. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. Silence. I owe you an apology. I leaned back. You've said that before. I know. But I mean it now. I said nothing. He continued. The board removed me. I wasn't surprised. The company is being restructured. I heard. We're trying to sell off some divisions. I waited. Then he said, I need your help. I almost laughed. With what? The logistics division. My smile disappeared. What about it? We need someone who understands the operation. And you thought of me? Yes. I shook my head. David, you fired me. I know. You blamed me for something I didn't do. I know. You damaged my career. I know. You protected Jessica. His voice broke. I know. There was a long silence. Then he said, I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. Part of me had waited a year to hear those words. But now that they had arrived, they didn't feel as powerful as I expected. Because I'd already moved on. Why are you calling me? He took a breath. Because I need someone I can trust. I almost smiled. You should have thought about that a year ago. I should have. Why didn't you? He was quiet. Finally. Because I was afraid. Of Jessica? No. Of what? Of admitting I was wrong. I stared at my office wall. And now? Now I know what being wrong cost me. He asked if we could meet. I agreed. Not because I needed closure. Because I wanted to see who he had become. We met the following Friday. Same restaurant where he'd once taken me to celebrate my promotion. He looked completely different. His hair had turned gray. His suit didn't fit properly. He looked exhausted. He stood when I approached. Emily? David. We sat. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he said, You look happy. I am. I'm glad. I believed him. For the first time, I think he meant it. He told me everything. Jessica had manipulated him. She convinced him the discrepancies were minor. Then she threatened to expose personal financial arrangements if he questioned her. He panicked. Instead of investigating, he chose the easier path. He blamed me. I thought I could contain it. He looked at his hands. I destroyed everything instead. I nodded. Yes. He looked at me. Do you hate me? I considered the question. No. His eyes filled with surprise. I thought you would. I used to. What changed? I realized hating you was keeping me connected to you. He lowered his head. I understand. Then he said the words I never expected. Emily. He took a breath. Will you hire me? I stared at him. You're serious? Yes. I run a logistics company. I know. You'd report to people who used to work for you. I know. You'd start below senior management. I know. You'd have to earn everyone's trust. I know. Why? He looked at me. Because I need to learn how to work for someone who actually deserves my trust. I didn't answer. Not yet. I had to decide whether forgiveness meant giving someone another chance. Or simply letting them go. And I knew one thing for certain. Whatever I decided, I would never again allow someone else's fear to determine my future. David's question stayed in my head for days. Will you hire me? I could have said no. Honestly, part of me wanted to. There was a time when I had dreamed about seeing him regret what he'd done. I imagined him losing everything. I imagined him calling me desperate. I imagined myself saying the words he had once said to me. You're fired. But when that moment finally arrived, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Because revenge had never been what I truly wanted. I wanted justice. I wanted my name back. I wanted the truth to be known. And most importantly, I wanted to become someone who wasn't defined by what David Mercer had done to me. The decision. On Monday morning, I called David. I've made a decision. He sounded nervous. Okay. I'll give you a job. Silence. Then, thank you, but don't misunderstand me. I won't. This isn't charity. I know. You'll start as a senior operations consultant. He paused. That's fair. You'll report directly to Sarah. Another pause. Sarah? Yes. I could almost hear him swallow. Understood? Your salary will be competitive, but there will be no executive benefits. Understood? And one more thing. What? You don't get to tell anyone who you used to be. He was silent. Why? Because I want to see who you are without your title. After a few seconds, he answered, Okay. His first day, David arrived at 7:55 a.m. Our office opened at 8. He wore a simple gray suit. No expensive watch. No assistant. No driver. No executive entourage. He walked through the front door carrying a plain coffee cup. Our receptionist looked up. Can I help you? I'm David Mercer. She smiled politely. Are you here for an interview? He looked at me across the lobby. No, I'm here to work. The receptionist looked confused. I walked over. Good morning, David. Good morning. I introduced him to the team. This is David. I didn't mention that he'd once been president of a company 5 times larger than ours. I didn't mention that he'd signed my termination letter. I didn't mention the investigation. I simply said, he's joining our operations team. Sarah walked forward. David extended his hand. Sarah? She stared at him, then shook it. David. For a second, neither moved. Sarah had been there when I carried that cardboard box out of Mercer Cole. She had seen what he did to me, but she didn't insult him. She simply said, Your desk is over there. David nodded. Thank you. His desk was next to the warehouse coordination team. No corner office. No private bathroom. No receptionist. Just a desk, a computer, a chair, and a stack of paperwork. His first assignment was reviewing shipping delays. For 8 hours, he worked quietly. At lunch, he sat with the rest of the employees. Nobody treated him like a former CEO. Nobody cared. And for the first time in his professional life, David had to earn respect. The mistake. 3 weeks into his new job, David made a mistake. He approved a shipment without verifying a carrier's insurance documents. The shipment was delayed. The client was angry. Sarah called him into a meeting. I watched from my office. David looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. Sarah shook her head. Sorry doesn't fix the problem. I know. Then fix it. He nodded. Understood. He spent the next 6 hours personally resolving the issue. He called the carrier, called the client, found another truck, paid the emergency transport fee from his department budget. By midnight, the shipment arrived. The next morning, he came into the office looking exhausted. Sarah walked over. Good job. David looked surprised. Thank you. She smiled. Don't get comfortable. He laughed. It was the first time I'd seen him genuinely laugh since he'd joined the company. The employee who hated him. Not everyone accepted him. One employee refused to speak to him. His name was Marcus. Marcus had worked at Mercer Cole for 12 years. David had once fired him during a restructuring. Marcus had lost his house. His marriage had nearly collapsed. Eventually, he joined Carter Logistics. When he saw David in the warehouse, he was furious. One afternoon, Marcus confronted him. You don't belong here. David didn't argue. I understand why you feel that way. You destroyed people's lives. I know. You fired Emily. I know. You protected Jessica. I know. Marcus stepped closer. And now you expect everyone to forgive you because you say you're sorry? David shook his head. No. Then what do you want? David looked him directly in the eyes. Nothing. Nothing? I want to earn back whatever trust I can. Marcus laughed. You can't. Maybe. David picked up a box. But I'm going to try. He walked away. Marcus watched him. He didn't forgive him. Not that day. The board meeting. 6 months after David joined Carter Logistics, I received a call from Richard Lawson, our investor. We need to talk. About what? The company is growing faster than expected. That's a good problem. Sometimes. He laughed. We're considering acquiring 2 regional logistics companies. I stared at the numbers. The acquisitions would double our customer base, but they would also require major financing. How much? About 18 million. I leaned back. That's a lot. Yes. We don't have that kind of cash. We can raise it. At what cost? Richard smiled. That's why I want you to meet someone. The following week, I met with a private investment group. They were interested in Carter Logistics, but they wanted control. 40% ownership. I immediately said no. The negotiations became difficult. They threatened to walk away. Our expansion plans were at risk. Then David asked to speak with me. Can I make a suggestion? Sure. Don't sell 40%. I wasn't planning to. They'll pressure you. I know. Don't let them. I looked at him. You've changed. He smiled. I learned from watching you. He helped restructure our proposal. Instead of selling equity, we created a strategic partnership. The investors would provide funding. Carter Logistics would retain operational control. The deal went through. Our company expanded into 8 states. And within another year, we became one of the fastest-growing privately owned logistics companies in the region. The phone call that changed everything. Then came a call from federal investigators. Ms. Carter? Yes? We're ready to conclude the Mercer Cole investigation. I sat quietly. What happens next? The evidence confirms you were wrongfully terminated. I closed my eyes. What about David? He cooperated. Jessica? She pleaded guilty. And the executives? Several settlements have been reached. I thanked them, then hung up. I sat alone for several minutes. I'd waited so long for someone official to say, you were right. But when it finally happened, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. The award. A month later, Carter Logistics won a National Business Award for Innovation. The ceremony was held in Chicago. I was invited to give a speech. Hundreds of business leaders filled the ballroom. When my name was announced, the audience applauded. I walked onto the stage. The award was placed in my hands. Then I looked at the audience. I thought about the cardboard box, the empty apartment, the rejection emails, the first $5,000 check, the tiny office above the dentist, Sarah joining me when I had almost nothing, and David, the man who had unintentionally pushed me toward the life I was meant to build. I began speaking. A year ago, I believed being fired was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The room became quiet. I was wrong. Sometimes the door that closes behind you is the door that forces you to discover what you can build without permission. People applauded. I continued. But there's something else I've learned. Success isn't proving your enemies wrong. Success is becoming someone you no longer need to prove anything to. The applause grew louder. I looked toward the back of the room. David was standing there. He was smiling. The conversation after the ceremony. After the event, David approached me. That was beautiful. Thank you. He looked at the award. I'm proud of you. I smiled. Thank you. He hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret hiring me? I thought about it. No. Why? Because you became a different man. He looked down. I wish I had been that man when you worked for me. So do I. He nodded. I know I can never undo what I did. No. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure I don't do it again. I smiled. That's enough. The last chapter of Mercer & Cole. Several months later, Mercer & Cole's remaining assets were officially purchased by Carter Logistics. I walked into the old headquarters for the first time in 2 years. The lobby looked exactly the same. The same marble floor. The same reception desk. The same elevator. I stood there quietly. David walked beside me. Strange? Very. We entered the executive office. My old office. The walls were empty. David looked at me. You should take this office. I laughed. No. Why? Because I don't need it. He smiled. Then what are you going to do with it? I looked through the glass walls at the employees outside. Turn it into a training room. David laughed. Of course. We transformed the office into the Carter Leadership Center. Every new manager had to attend. We taught ethical leadership, financial accountability, employee protection, and one rule became the foundation of the program. Never sacrifice an innocent employee to protect a powerful one. I wrote that sentence myself. It stayed on the wall. The person I became. A year earlier, I had walked out of Mercer Cole with one cardboard box. I thought I had lost my career. Instead, I'd gained my freedom. I thought David had destroyed my future. Instead, he had accidentally pushed me toward it. I thought Jessica had stolen my reputation. Instead, she taught me never to ignore my instincts. I thought rejection meant I wasn't good enough. Instead, it taught me to build something where my value couldn't be determined by someone else's opinion. And I thought revenge meant watching the people who hurt me suffer. But I learned something far more powerful. Revenge wasn't necessary. My life had become the answer. One Friday evening, I was preparing to leave the office when David stopped by. You heading home? Yes. He smiled. I have a question. What? Would you mind if I stayed another hour? I laughed. Why? I want to finish the quarterly reports. You know you're allowed to go home, right? He smiled. I'm still getting used to that. I looked at him. You've changed. So have you. I grabbed my coat. Good night, David. Good night, Emily. I walked toward the elevator, then stopped. I looked back at the office, at the people working there, at the company name on the wall, Carter Logistics. My name, my company, my future. And suddenly I remembered the day I had carried that cardboard box through the front doors of Mercer Cole. Back then, I thought I was walking away from everything. Now I understood. I wasn't walking away. I was walking toward something. Something I could never have built if I'd stayed comfortable. Something I could never have imagined while sitting in David Mercer's office. Something that belonged completely to me. And that became the greatest lesson of my life. Sometimes the person who fires you thinks they're ending your story. They don't realize they're only turning the page. And sometimes, the greatest comeback isn't making the person who hurt you regret their decision. It's building a life so much better that you no longer care whether they regret it at all. The end. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment telling us what part moved you the most. Your support helps us continue sharing heartwarming stories that inspire kindness, hope, and second chances. Thank you for watching.